Thoroughbass Made Easy, or Practical Rules for Finding and Applying Its Various Chords with Little Trouble. This book we're looking at was once a bestseller, and the publishers of this book said, according to the notes in the Oxford Companion to Music, that their entire fortune derived from sales of this book and no other. So at one point, this was, in the English-speaking world, the book for learning Thoroughbass. Thoroughbass Made Easy, or Practical Rules for Finding and Applying Its Various Chords with Little Trouble, together with variety of examples in notes, showing the manner of accompanying concertos, solos, songs, and recitatives by Niccolo Pasquali. The author's address to the learners. As the following practical rules have been of considerable use to many of my own scholars, I think I serve the interest of music in general when I make them public. And if the method here laid down is carefully observed, I am confident this study will be found much easier than is commonly imagined. It was the advice of a noted painter to his pupils, nulla dies sine linea, no day without a line. The like advice I beg leave to address to you. Let no day pass without some practice. And though this book doth not pretend to teach either the theory or the refined elegance of thorough bass, yet I flatter myself that if diligently perused, it may prove a good introduction to both. The rules and lessons being placed in that order which tends most to the ready progress of learners, I must likewise entreat that you never proceed to a new lesson till you are so far masters of what is past, that you not only understand how it ought to be performed, but are yourselves able to perform it with ease, and above all in just and equal time. The figures above the notes explained, with directions how to use them. Thoroughbass is performed by adding to the notes of the bass such chords as properly belong to them, so that while the left hand plays the bass note, the right hand, at the same time, plays 3 or 4 different notes along with it, not successively, but together and at once, unless you're playing the lute, of course. And from this combination of sounds results what is called harmony. But, as it would always be difficult and often impossible to guess at the precise chords which the composer intends should accompany the various notes of the bass, without comparing that bass with its treble and other parts designed to be played or sung with it, as a remedy for this, figures have been introduced, which, being placed directly above the bass notes, give a full view at once of the chords that are properly to accompany them. So that, strictly speaking, to play thorough bass is to play the notes with the left hand and the figures with the right hand. Among the various chords in use, the chief, which is called the perfect or common chord, occurring more frequently than any of the rest, shall be first explained. It is marked thus 8, 5, 3, which signifies that together with any note of the bass over which the above figures are placed, the right hand is to play its third. For example, here is C, Sol, Fa, Ut. So the third is E, La, Mi, and the fifth, G, Sol, Re, Ut. So the third and fifth and eighth or octave. The manner of executing it will be best understood by an example. Let the bass note be C. The first thing to be done is to prepare a finger of the left hand for striking that key. Then begin at that C, reckoning it the first. Count 3 notes upwards, which will bring you to E. That's I La Mi, which is the third to C. And let the thumb of the right hand be prepared for striking that key. And here I must observe, by way of caution, that in reckoning the notes which are expressed by the figures, the long keys are only to be regarded, the short ones serving to denote sharps or flats, for which there is no occasion in the present case. Having thus made sure of the first or lowest figure, namely 3, begin again at C, and still reckoning it 1, count upwards till you come to 5. Which brings you to G. G, Sol, Re, Ut in the Baroque name of this letter, of this note, the 5th to C, expressed by the middle finger 5. And let the first finger be prepared for striking that key. By these means, 2 of the figures are secured, 5 and 3. Then begin once more at C, and counting in the same manner, 8 notes upwards, the 8th will prove another C. C, Sol, Fa, Ut in the Baroque. The octave to the bass, expressed by the highest figure, 8. And the 4th finger must be made ready for striking that key. So the thumb strikes the first key, the C, the foundation key, and then E, the next thumb, then. When all the fingers are thus prepared, bring them down upon the keys equally and at once. This is thorough bass, videlicet, C, Sol, Fa, Ut, with its common chord. These 3 figures are not always played in the same order, but, as occasion requires, may be varied in 3 different ways. Octave, 5th and 3rd. 5th, octave and 3rd. Octave, 3rd and 5th. Let the same example be viewed in notes, being A with its common chord, by which it will appear that, in each of those ways, the chord is composed of the self-same notes. C, E, A. Or E, A, C. Or A, C, E. The removing of any of these notes an octave higher, as it happens to the C in the second way, and to both C and E in the first, has no alteration in the rules of harmony, which consider the notes of chords only as they are intrinsically in themselves, not as they are occasionally played high or low. The performer always choosing that way which is most convenient to their hand, or consistent with some rules that presently shall be discussed. But, as a beginner may find a difficulty in carrying 3 different ways in their mind, for every note of the bass that bears common chord, I have chosen only 2, which will be sufficient to learn by, until they are become acquainted with all the rules, and then with ease they may apply any of the 3 at pleasure. Marks by which the common chord is known. No figures over any note signifies common chord. A single 3, or a single 5, or a single 8, or any two of these figures, 5, 3, or 8, 3, or 8, 5, all 3, 8, 5, 3, mean always the same chord. Also, a sharp, a flat, or a natural over the bass note without any other figure describes the common chord, with this addition that the third, so here is C, here's the third, shall be either sharp, or flat, or natural, according to the mark. Of the first and second common chord to each of the 7 notes of music. It is for expedition's sake that I call them first and second chords, instead of first and second way of common chords. The first is that which is naturally used to notes bearing this chord, for example C. The second is only brought in on some particular occasions, as hereafter shall be explained. But before we examine when the second chords are to be used, it is requisite to acquire a local memory of the first and also a readiness of the fingers in playing them, for which purpose lesson 1, see plate 1, is to be practiced until the scholar plays it tolerably quick. And also, it will be advisable to play it as a kind of general prelude before the other lessons, still with a view of getting the habit of striking always the first chords when no reason obliges to do otherwise. And as I suppose that the unexperienced might be at a loss what fingers to apply to the chords and to the notes of the bass, I have annexed in this and a few other lessons a small figure to each for their instruction, and from this place they may form an idea of the rest. Nota bene, note well, 0 stands for the thumb, 1 stands for the forefinger, 2 stands for the second finger, 3 stands for the third finger, and 4th stands for the little finger. When the scholar is become tolerably well acquainted with the way of fingering the chords and the bass notes, it will be necessary to practice the same lesson without the help of looking at the chords above the notes, and peruse it as it is set in plate 13, which method must also be observed with regard to the other lessons, as soon as they are become a little familiar. Any doubt that arises concerning the chords, or the way of fingering them, may be easily solved by turning back a few leaves and viewing them again, set at their full length. When the second common chords are to be applied, the second chords are used for the following reasons. 1. In order to avoid 2 consecutive or following octaves between the highest note of the chords and the notes of the bass. In order to avoid 2 consecutive or following fifths between the highest note of the chords and the notes of the bass. In order to render some chords more harmonious by their places. In order to avoid skipping too much from one chord to another. Of 2 consecutive or following octaves and how to avoid them. It is disallowed in thorough basses to play 2 chords following one another whose highest note is the octave of the bass. E.g., by examining the first chords, where the highest notes are figured, We shall find that only C and D fall under this rule, both having the octave for their highest note. The way to avoid this disallowance is to alter one of these chords so that the highest note may not be the octave. Therefore, when C is found preceding or following D, instead of its first, its second chord must be played, by which the highest note of C's chord is changed from the octave to the third. Lesson 2 on plate 2 is a practice of this first rule. Follow the asterisk over the chords. This asterisk points out such C's as precede or follow the D's, to which the second chord is applied instead of the first, and serves to distinguish them from those that are not near a D. Of 2 consecutive or following fifths and how to avoid them. This is the second disallowance in thorough bass. Videlicet, not to play 2 chords following one another, whose highest note is fifth with the bass. And by examining again the first chords, it will be found that E, F, and G are liable to this rule, each having a fifth for their highest note. Consequently, some of them must be altered, and thus F, when near E, shall have its second chord instead of the first, which changes its highest note from a fifth into a third. G, when near F, shall have its second chord instead of the first, which likewise changes its highest note into a third. G also, when near E, shall have its second chord for the same reason. And there's a note here. The elegant way of playing thorough bass demands that also 2 consecutive fifths should be avoided between the lowest notes of the chords and the notes of the bass. But a practitioner may pass by this rule for the present and observe it only when he is or they are become master of the thorough bass.